Hi everyone, our today's lesson is about Jonatan Swift and his masterpiece Gulliver's Travels. Here we have three contents that concerning to this video lesson. The first one is Jonatan Swift as one of the greatest 18th century satirists and his masterpiece Gulliver's Travels. So here we will talk about Jonatan Swift's early life, his literary activity, and the general information about his masterpiece Gulliver's Travels. And then we will start to discuss the major themes of this book. Of course, here I wrote just some examples, but we will discuss more than these ones. So here the body, literature and language, travel, otherness, but also we have the contrast between society and individual, and also we have the importance of communication between people, between other foreign people. And the third one is analysis of characters, motifs and symbols in Gulliver's Travel. So here also we will analyze the symbols, motifs and characters that are describing in this book. Let's get started. I would like to start with a statement by James Allen Downey. He writes that the truth satire condemns society by reference to an ideal, and that such is Swift's satire. So I would like to explain the meaning of this statement. This statement by Downey not only serves as a good beginning for defining satire, but also hints at an important aspect that should not be forgotten in any analysis of Swift's satirical works. Swift, as any satirist in fact, needed and used certain occasions and persons in his times to trigger his satirical writing and refer to another ideal. So, because of his fixation with politics and his temperamental inability to ignore public affairs, his writings, and especially his pamphlets and satires, reflect prominent issues of his times. For a satirical writer who wants to expose human flaws, it is, of course, essential to use examples that he expects his audience to know. It was therefore necessary that Swift in his satires referred to prominent persons or recent developments and issues of his days to make sure that his satirical messages were understood by the English and Irish readers of the early 18th century. So, who was Jonatan Swift? So here we have some general information about his life. That born in Dublin, in Ireland, he was the greatest prose writer of the 18th century. Oh, sorry for this mistake, I will correct it. One of the finest artists in the world, and was an Anglo-Irish satirist, essayist, political pamphleteer, poet and cleric. He became Dean of St. Patrick's Cathedral in Dublin, and he was a misanthrope. So, I would like to explain the final one, this last one. He was a misanthrope. So maybe you know the meaning of this word, maybe you don't, so I will explain. It's considered that Swift hated people, especially he hated to be in the social places. He wanted to be isolated from the society, but also we can see the signs of his feelings in his books too. But I would like to say that Swift doesn't hate man. So it's my opinion, of course. You can criticize me, and if you want, you can add your own thoughts about his feelings. But I would like to say that he didn't hate man, but he hates fake intellectualism, and he hates pettiness. He hates the disparity in social classes and the treatment of the lower classes by the upper classes. That's why he wanted to be isolated from the society, from the fake society. And other one, the literary activity. So you know that there are a lot of books, short stories, and also novels by Swift, but here I just chose some of them, not all of them. Swift's first major prose work, A Tale of a Tube, that was written in 1704. The Battle of the Books, the same year he wrote this book, and Gulliver's Travels he wrote in 1726, and The Modest Proposal. And the final, I wrote Directions to Servants. It was written in 1731. It finished in this year, but it couldn't be published in this year. It published when Swift died. So let's start with Gulliver's Travels. The book consists of 4 parts. And it's really not the real adventure book. So the Gulliver is protagonist and also the narrator of the book, and all of these incidents happen to him, so around him, but it's in his dream, not in the real adventure. So when we read about Daniel Defoe, the Robinson Crusoe, it's the real adventure. But here, Gulliver's Travel is not a real adventure. So the part 1, A Voyage to Lilliput. So here, Lilliputians live here. They are so little, so short. And I will explain other symbols here too for the next slides. And part 2, A Voyage to Brobdingnag. I know that the words are so hard to pronounce, but try to learn the pronunciation, because in the seminar I will ask about the symbols of these places. And part 3, A Voyage to Laputa. It's a Japanese name, so A Voyage to Laputa and Japan. And part 4, A Voyage to the Country of the Houyhnhnms. It's hard for me to pronounce too, but try to pronounce. So several consonants are coming together, that's why it's hard. Houyhnhnms. So it's other place of the country, and it's the last voyage. Let's have some basic information about this book. So Gulliver's Travels, a misanthropic satire of humanity, was written in 1726, as I said before, by Jonatan Swift. Like many other authors, Swift uses the journey as the backdrop for his satire. He invents a second author, Captain Lemuel Gulliver, who narrates and speaks directly to the reader from his own experience. Gulliver embarks on 4 distinct journeys, each of which begins with a shipwreck and ends with either a daring escape or a congenial decision that it's time for Gulliver to leave. The societies Gulliver comes into contact with help him to examine his own culture more closely. When Gulliver's Travels was published in 1726, the examination of English culture was not appreciated. The novel was highly controversial because of the light in which it presented humanity, and more specifically the English. So, the major themes. So, as I said before, we have several themes here. The first one is about travel. The novel is set in the traditional mode of satirical travel literature. Many other classic works use the same device, such as Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales and Homer's Odyssey, and so on. Travel, in the case of Gulliver's Travels, gives Swift the opportunity to compare the ways of humanity, more specifically those of the English, with several other ways of living. And travel also keeps the story entertaining. So that's why it's the first major theme of this book. And the contrast between individual and society. Like many narratives about voyages to non-existent lands, Gulliver's Travels explores the idea of utopia, an imaginary model of the ideal community. Swift's attitude toward utopia is much more skeptical, and one of the main aspects he points out about famous historical utopias is a tendency to privilege the collective group over the individual. And Gulliver's Travels could in fact be described as one of the first novels of modern alienation, focusing on an individual's repeated failures to integrate into societies to which he does not belong. England itself is not much of a homeland for Gulliver, and with his surgeon's business unprofitable and his father's estate insufficient to support him, he may be right to feel alienated from it. He never speaks fondly or nostalgically about England, and every time he returns home, he is quick to leave again. Gulliver never complains explicitly about feeling lonely, but the embittered and antisocial misanthrope we see at the end of the novel is clearly a profoundly isolated individual. Thus, if Swift's satire mocks the excess of communal life, it may also mock the excess of individualism in his portrait of a miserable and lonely Gulliver taking to his horses at home in England. And the other one is narrow-mindedness and enlightenment. So it's also one of the main important themes of the book. Throughout his journeys, Gulliver comes into contact with several different races of people, as you know, all of which are narrow-minded in some way. Many of the peoples are conspicuously narrow-minded, such as the Lilliputians, who have wars over the correct way to cut open an egg. Even the Houyhnhnms, who are so revered by Gulliver, cannot believe there are other reasonable ways of living. Much of Swift's satirical focus is on people who cannot see past their own ways, their own power, or their own beliefs. And the readers, especially his contemporary readers, can see themselves in some of this satire. So, other theme is the body. The body. And in each of the various lands to which Gulliver travels, he comes face to face with excrement. For example, in Langnag, the professor worked to turn excrement back into the food. It began as in the country of Houyhnhnms, the Yahoos threw their excrement at each other and at him too. Looking at the body from new perspectives gives Gulliver a special insight into the body's materiality. When he is relatively small, he can see the minute, ugly details of others' bodies. By looking closely at the body as a material thing and paying attention to what humans do on a daily basis, Swift makes it impossible to look at humans as exclusively spiritual or intellectual beings. And the other theme is the importance of literature and language. Gulliver is a reader, so he says, "My hours of leisure I spent in reading the best authors, ancient and modern, being always provided with a good number of books." So from all of the chapters we can see that in every meeting with other people, Gulliver tries to learn their language and tries to teach their some literary books to read, to make them read. And he reads whenever he has the time, and on each of the islands he visits, he makes a point of noticing whether the inhabitants ride or do not ride. The Lilliputians, for instance, ride diagonally like the ladies of England. The Houyhnhnms lack a form of writing, but Gulliver spends a great deal of time considering how they pass on their history. Gulliver is also a master linguist, making him a man or virtually all peoples. On each of the islands he visits, he learns the language quickly, sometimes being taught by learned scholars. As in Lilliput, and once being taught by a young girl in Brobdingnag, his ability to communicate suggests the value of communication across cultures. Once Gulliver has learned the language of a given society, he visits the king or queen or emperor or governor and discusses politics. And here this ability to share knowledge is beneficial to both parties. Sorry for interrupting. Okay. We were talking about themes, yes. So we talked about travel, the contrast between individual and society, narrow-mindedness and enlightenment, the body, the importance of literature and language. Now let's talk about otherness. So otherness plays an important role in Gulliver's travels. It's one of the most important themes in this book. Throughout his journeys, Gulliver never quite fits in, regardless of how long he stays. Partly this is a matter of size. In Lilliput, he is the only giant. In Brobdingnag, everyone else is a giant and he is small. Mainly, however, it's a matter of being different and simply from elsewhere. On his final journey, when his captain and his crew mutins, they leave him on an uncharted island. In Hounenum, where there actually are human beings, they are disgusting creatures with whom Gulliver certainly cannot relate. Finally, after spending years with the Hounenums and coming to consider them better in every way than humanity, Gulliver is still a human. Yet his experience has made him an outsider in England, completely disgusted with even his own wife and children. And the last theme is about the limits of human understanding in this book. So the idea that humans are not meant to know everything and that all understanding has a natural limit is important in Gulliver's travels. Swift insists that there is a realm of understanding into which humans are simply not supposed to venture. Thus, his depictions of rational societies like Brobdingnag and Hounenum land emphasize not these people's knowledge or understanding of abstract ideas, but their ability to live their lives in a wise and steady way. So I hope that you make some notes because I write here just key phrases, and when I talk you should write it because I will ask them during the seminar and also in colloquium, in the revision. So the main characters, we have a lot of characters. There are a lot of characters in this book. Each part they have new characters that just we can encounter, but I chose just some of them, main of them. The first one is Gulliver, the narrator and protagonist of the story. And although Lemuel Gulliver's vivid and detailed style of narration makes it clear that he is intelligent and well-educated, his perceptions are naive and gullible. He has virtually no emotional life, or at least no awareness of it, and his comments are strictly factual. Gulliver never thinks that the absurdities he encounters are funny and never makes the satiric connection between the lands he visits and his own home. Gulliver's naivety makes the satire possible as we pick up on things that Gulliver does not notice. And the second main character is the Emperor, the ruler of Lilliput, like all Lilliputians. This emperor, so his power and majesty impress Gulliver deeply, but to us he appears both laughable and sinister. Because of his tiny size, his belief that he can control Gulliver seems silly. He is proud of possessing the tallest trees and biggest palaces in the kingdom, but he is also quite hospitable, spending a fortune on his captives' food. The emperor is both a satire of the autocratic ruler and a strangely serious portrait of political power. So that's why I placed it at the second place. So Mary Burton Gulliver, she is Gulliver's wife, who demonstrates how unsentimental and unemotional Gulliver is. He makes no reference to any affection for his wife, either here or later in his travels when he is far away from her, and his detachment is so cool as to raise questions about his ability to form human attachments. When he returns to England, she is merely one part of his former existence, and he records no emotion, even as she hugs him wildly. The most important facts about her in Gulliver's mind are her social origin and the income she generates. And the farmer, Gulliver's first master in Brobdingnag. So the farmer speaks to Gulliver, showing that he is willing to believe that the relatively tiny Gulliver may be as rational as he himself is, and treats him with gentleness. Generally, the farmer represents the average Brobdingnagian, so the people who are living in a Brobdingnag, or no great gifts or intelligence, wielding an extraordinary power over Gulliver simply by virtue of his immense size test. So the king of Brobdingnag, who, in contrast to the emperor of Lilliput, seems to be a true intellectual, well versed in political science among other disciplines, while his wife has an intimate, friendly relationship with the diminutive visitor. The king's relation to Gulliver is limited to serious discussions about the history and institutions of Gulliver's native land. He is thus a figure of rational thought who somewhat prefigures the Hohenheims in Book 4. So the last one is Lord Munady, a lord of Lagado, capital of the underdeveloped land Venus Laputa, who hosts Gulliver and gives him a tour of the country on Gulliver's third voyage. Munady is a rare example of practical-minded intelligence, both in Lagado, where the applied sciences are wildly impractical. Lord Munady serves as a reality check for Gulliver on his third voyage, an objective-minded contrast to the theoretical delusions of the other inhabitants of Laputa and Lagado. So we talked about the main characters. So just here 6 characters you can learn. Of course, you can add some other characters and you can analyze their inner sides. It's up to you. You're free. But please try to make a notes about these characters that I talked to you, and also the themes. Not just write one sentence, not just tell me the one sentence. It's just an example here I write for the slide, but you see that I talk more about these things that I write in the slideshow. So try to make notes that I talk about, and because they will be the main question points for me to ask for the seminar and revision. And the meaning of symbols. You know that we can encounter a lot of different symbols during our life and in art also. But in literature also we can encounter them, and we have to know the just meaning, the message of these symbols. So we have here I chose just 4 symbols. Of course, they have a lot of symbols, but I chose 4 of them, the most important ones. Lilliputians. So the Lilliputians symbolize humankind's wildly excessive pride in its own puny existence. And the Brobdingnagians, it's really hard for me to pronounce, and I understand you if you have some trouble to pronounce it, never mind. It's not English word. The Brobdingnagians symbolize the private, personal, and physical side of humans when examined up close and in great detail. And the Lilliputians represent the folly of theoretical knowledge that was no relation to human life and no use in the actual world. And Houyhnhnms. The Houyhnhnms represent an ideal of a rational existence, a life governed by sense and moderation, of which philosophers since Plato have long dreamed. As in Plato's ideal community, the Houyhnhnms have no need to lie nor any word for lying. They do not use force but only strong exhortation. So, let's start with our motifs, major motifs of the novel. Again, I chose 3, but you can add if you have any other information or thought. So, excoriation. Excoriation, it symbolizes everything that is crass and ignoble about the human body and about human existence in general. While it may seem a trivial and laughable motif, the recurrent mention of excrement in Gulliver's Travels actually has a serious philosophical significance in the narrative. And it obstructs any attempt to view humans as wholly spiritual and mentally transcendent creatures. Since the Enlightenment culture of 18th century England tended to view humans optimistically as noble souls rather than vulgar bodies, Swift's emphasis on the common fields of life is a slap in the face of the philosophers of his day. Thus, when Gulliver urinates to put out a fire in Lilliput, or when Brobdingnag and flies defecate on his meals, or when the scientist in Lagado works to transform excrement back into food, we are reminded how very little human reason has to do with everyday existence. Swift suggests that the human condition in general is dirtier and lowlier than we might like to believe it is. And other languages, foreign languages. Being able to know different foreign languages indicates a cross-cultural sensitivity, a kind of anthropologist's awareness of how things vary from culture to culture. So here Gulliver appears to be a gifted linguist. So he is so well educated, so clever and intelligent, knowing at least the basics of several European languages and even a fair amount of ancient Greek. So this knowledge serves him well. He is meticulous in recording the details of language in his narrative, often given the original as well as the translation. So, surprisingly, Gulliver's mastery of foreign languages generally does not correspond to any real interest in cultural differences. He compares any of the governments he visits to that of his native England, and he rarely even speculates on how or why cultures are different at all. And the other motive, the last motive, is about the clothes, so clothing. We are informed about the mouse skin he wears in Brobdingnag and how the finest silks of the land are as thick as blankets on him. In one sense, these descriptions are obviously an easy narrative device with which Swift can chart his protagonist's progression from one culture to another. And the motif of clothing carries a deeper, more psychologically complex meaning as well. Gulliver's intense interest in the state of his clothes may signal a deep-seated anxiety about his identity, or lack thereof. He does not seem to have much selfhood. So we talked about the motifs, so try to learn about these three motifs, and you can add your own opinions too. And the other slide is about analysis of some of the quotations. You know that to read the books from the original version, it's the most important thing for you, because when you read it from the original, you can directly connect with the author and also narrator and also other characters. So that's why you should read the original book firstly. It's your main task for home. So here let's have a look to this quotation in part 1, chapter 1. My father had a small estate in Nottinghamshire. I was the third of 5 sons. So I was bound apprentice to Mr. James Bates, an eminent surgeon in London, my father now and then sending me small sums of money. When I left Mr. Bates, I went down to my father, where, by the assistance of him and my Uncle John, I got £40 and a promise of £30 a year. So, why I chose this part of the quote? Because from this paragraph you can understand many things about this book and about Jonatan Swift's own opinions. So this introductory paragraph from part 1, chapter 1 is often passed over, simply providing the preliminary facts of Gulliver's life. Gulliver is bourgeois. He is primarily interested in money, acquisitions, and achievement, and his life story is filtered through these desires. The first sentence means more than just a statement of his financial situation, since the third son of a professor of only a small estate would have no hopes of inheriting enough on which to support himself, and would be expected to leave the estate and seek his own fortune. If Gulliver had been the first-born son, he might very well not have embarked on his travels, but the passage is even more revealing in its tone, which is starkly impersonal. Gulliver provides no sentimental characterization of his father Bates or Uncle John. They appear in his story only insofar as they further him in life. There is no mention of any youthful dreams or ambitions or of any romantic attachments. So it's, of course, you can add your own opinions about this quote, but the main meaning of this quote is that I talked to you. And the second quote, let's have a look. My reconciliation to the Yahoo kind in general might not be so difficult if they would be content with those vices and follies only with which nature hath entitled them to. I am not in the least provoked at the sign of a lawyer, a pickpocket, a colonel. This is all according to the due course of things. But when I behold a lump of deformity and diseases, both in body and mind, smitten with pride, it immediately breaks all the measures of my patience. Neither shall I ever be able to comprehend how such an animal and such a vice could tally together. So, if it would be the seminar, I would like to ask you about your own opinion after reading it, but unfortunately it's not our seminar. so I can't know about your opinions. So let me tell you about the meaning, explanation of these quotes. So this quotation comes from the end of the narrative in part 4, as you see here, part 4 and chapter 12. So it's part and chapter. It's not a name and surname. So in part 4, chapter 12, when Gulliver describes the difficulties he has had in readjusting to his own human culture, he now associates English and European culture with the Yahoos, though hypocrisy that he describes here is not a Yahoo characteristic. By attributing a number of sins to the due course of things, Gulliver expresses his new conviction that humanity is, as the Houyhnhnms believe, corrupt and ungovernable at heart. Humans are nothing more than beasts equipped with only enough reason to make their corruption dangerous. But even worse than that, he says, it's inability of humanity to see its own failings, own failure, to recognize its depravity behind its false nobility. And Gulliver's apparent exemption of himself from this charge against humanity, referring to such an animal rather than to humans, may be yet another moment of denial. Gulliver's difficulty in including himself among the humans he describes as wise-ridden animals is symbolic of the identity crisis he undergoes at the end of the novel, even if he is unaware of it. And we've finished with this last quotation, and I have some suggestions to you, like a home task. Firstly, you should read the novel in the original language, in English language. I know that it may be, it may give you some trouble to understand it easily because it's not the modern English language, but they have some explanations, footprints that they can help you to understand the core idea of the book, and try to analyze the book according to your own point of view. What does it mean? It means we have many symbols, motifs, themes here in this video lesson, and you can add your own opinions, own thoughts, and own additions to the symbols or motifs or themes, and you can criticize me that in your point of view may be quite different from my point of view. So just feel free to criticize all these all these writings on this PPT. And also, if you don't have any thought, don't have any opinion to criticize me, then learn them and try to read the book originally. Extend the analysis of quotes, so you can choose other quotes to analyze. I just choose 2 of them, and you can extend it. Mention writers' messages during our seminar. You know that it's the main purpose of our subject, our lesson, that we have to learn the main aim of writers and what are their messages under these books. If you don't learn anything from this book, if you can't catch the message of the writer, it's just a waste of time for you to read it. So try to mention them during the seminar. And that's all. I think it's the last slide. Yes, it's the last. And thanks a lot for watching, and see you next time on our seminar. Goodbye.